Present, thank you. And now if y'all would like to join us, Councilmember Griffin will lead us in a prayer and the Pledge of Allegiance. The flag is right over there back behind me.
Yes, thank you so much. We're going to say a little prayer. Dear Heavenly Father, we thank you for this day. We thank you for all the many blessings that you bestowed upon us. We thank you for the city of Charleston, for the state of South Carolina, for the United States of America, and for all of our brothers and sisters around this world. Dear Lord, we continue to hurt through this coronavirus. It has changed our lives drastically, and we're still learning how to cope and how to deal with our ever-changing world. The only way that we can do that, Lord, is to open our arms to you, to follow in your word and in your goodwill. Please be with us. Please help us. Please help us think with our hearts and also our minds and do everything in your name. We could not make it through this without you. We will not. And we ask you, Lord, to please also help us be civil, be humble, be faithful, be grateful. We still have so many things to be grateful for. And the only way we're going to do this is by living through you and by you living through us and you helping us be better brothers and sisters to everyone around this world. In Christ's name we pray. Amen.
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 I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Good job, Councilmember Griffin. And you know, I normally start our regular meetings by sharing with folks where the exits are in case the meeting gets interrupted. So everybody's on your own if we need to exit. Okay, so approval of city council minutes for both March the 24th.
For approval.
We have a motion to approve.
Second.
I hear a second from Councilmember Mitchell.
Yes.
Any changes, deletions, insertions? Hearing none, all in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? The ayes have it. Next, for our citizens participation period, Vanessa, are you going to lead that or Jennifer?
Yes, I have it.
Okay.
We have a number of people who wanted to speak. Now, I know that all the council members should have gotten copies of the majority of these. And so I'm just going to give just a portion of what they asked for. So the first one is coming from Dr. Harriet Rivas. And it says, I am writing to oppose the new conservation ordinance, which is now written. There are several reasons for my opposition, but I will focus on a few of the items today. So first, it's the renaming of the cluster ordinance to the conservation ordinance. Seems like a way to deflect attention to the fact that both these ordinances are cluster homes in a small area for a very dense subdivision. My neighbors and I are opposed to this density as it creates a greater concentration of stormwater runoff due to homes, driveways, etc. being so close together. There are very limited land and vegetation between the homes to absorb the water. This is not in keeping with the adjacent SR1 neighborhoods, and it is not good for drainage despite all of the retention ponds and the models that the engineers are trying to use to get around this. So that's a synopsis of one of the things that she's concerned about. Next, we have a similar concern, and this is coming from Miss Alice Libet. And she says, if Dr. Rivas had written her letter as a petition, I would have signed it, as would many of my neighbors. I live in Cross Creek, in the Cross Creek subdivision adjacent to Marlboro. Residents in Cross Creek have been subject to the same flooding problems and the same lack of maintenance of ditches. The situation has been made worse by the Fleming Woods development and the horrible development of the Standard and the other new development on Maybank Highway. So she's concerned about that. And then we have, where's my other one? Oops. Oh, here. Okay. Then we have Jake LeBrier, and he lives at 28 Riverside Drive. He has a question. Why was the loop around Hampton Park opened up for traffic again? Daily vehicular trips on the peninsula are down by a huge percentage, and there's no logical reason to add back the insignificant traffic capacity provided by a loop road. The benefit to the community provided by the closure so obviously outweighed the negligible benefit of a few drivers who drive that route. The next item is coming from Katie Zimmerman. And she thanks you for the opportunity to speak. Each of you has heard from Charleston Moves over the past several weeks about examples from other cities, large and small, across the country that are shifting how they use public space in order to accommodate social distancing. One of the first things that was necessary to tackle was providing for more outdoor linear space for people to move and socially distance. We ask that you consider doing so for several streets, especially since motor vehicle traffic is done substantially. And so she has concerns about that and actually has a lot of suggestions. Okay, the next one will be Lauren Gelati, I believe. And she also thanks you for your continued leadership in the many hours of overtime that you've given the community. But she says local residents and retailers, despite new limited indoor reopening opportunities, will continue to suffer economic hardship to social distancing guidelines and appropriate public concern over spending sustained amounts of time in an indoor environment. The city of Charleston has an unprecedented opportunity and responsibility to expand public outdoor auto space, parking, and underutilized travel lanes for temporary use of safe walking, biking, dining, retail space, and to give the local business community a fighting chance for survival. Okay, and then we have one from Stephanie Barna, and I hope I'm pronouncing the name right. I think it's a good idea for the city to immediately provide more space to citizens in order for us to safely exercise and conduct business. We need to convert parking spaces into places for outdoor dining, widen sidewalks, increase the size of bike lanes, and make it easy for businesses to be creative in conducting business during this unprecedented time. Next is Rob Brennan, and he's from Charleston, South Carolina. Can a private wedding venue within the city limits host a wedding without the following city, state, government COVID-19 mandates? And when can the city start hosting events, weddings, for example, that host 40 to 200 people? Thank you for any response and clarity. Then we have Caroline Cox at 330 Concord Street. My balcony, which sits back from the river, gets black dust particles from the ships. I can only imagine what people breathe. Is it getting to the children who play in the park across the street? Also, the traffic from passenger arrival can block our roads. I understand that the city does not get revenue from the ships to cover this cost for the city. All right, next is Erin Fennell from 364 President Street. Please keep Hampton Park closed to vehicular traffic. Many children and families are using the park to get outside, trying to stay safe and healthy while following social distancing recommendations. Schools are closed camps are canceled through June, and the park should be closed to vehicles who allow children and families a space for safe and healthy. Okay, a space to stay safe and healthy during the continued time of social distancing, whatever. Distancing. And I thought there was another one. I have several pieces of paper that were given to me, so.
I think that's it.
Is that it?
Yeah, that, yeah.
Okay, all right.
There's also one, Cashin Drolet submitted a comment by telephone.
Oh, okay. Okay, you want to do that one, Jennifer? Do you have it?
And she just said that on behalf of the foundation, I would like to encourage the Ways and Means Committee members and the council to move forward with bids and purchases for consultants to aid in the 2020 Comprehensive Land Use Plan rewrites. The comprehensive plan is an extremely important guiding document for our city and will set forth our goals for the next 10 years. As such, we need to have subject matter experts and the appropriate consultants at the table to guide the Planning Commission, City Council, and citizens through this process. I encourage you to move forward with procurement of these consultants tonight. Many thanks. And Mayor, we also have 2 people that have signed up to speak by phone. And Tracy is actually going to help us with that. Rory, and I might be mispronouncing the last name, Wojcik, and Lauren Gelatli.
Okay.
Tracy, if you want to.
Well,
Sorry, I've unmuted Rory.
This is Rory Wojcik. I live at 30 Gordon Street in Charleston. Mayor Tecklenburg, members of the council, thank you for the time to speak today. I wish to speak about automobile traffic and the interaction with micromobility, mainly bike and pedestrians in and around the city. Particularly, I'd like to speak about Mary Murray Drive. First, I want to applaud the City Council member Saccharin for his open communication and his continued efforts to express concern regarding bike ped facilities on Mary Murray Drive. They are appreciated and heard within the community. How our community uses and interacts with our parks and public space has changed. The need for public space to support the physical and mental well-being of our community is expanding and evolving. From what I understand, there's been some meaningful discussion about the hours of safe riding and safe walking around Hampton Park. The hours that were discussed were 4 to 8 p.m. Monday through Friday, 8 to noon on Saturday, and this targets a specific sector of the community. Targeting these times truly limits the demographic usage of this public space. Creating space for all ages to walk and ride, socialize while maintaining social distance promotes physical and mental health during a time of crisis. I respectfully request the closure of Mary Murray Drive 24/7 as to allow for a wide breadth of users during this time. Thank you.
okay, Jennifer, did you say Lauren Gelati?
I did.
Because I read
Yes.
a portion of hers.
Ms. Gelatli's actually on the call and I've just unmuted her.
All right.
Good evening, Council and Mayor. I won't repeat myself, and thank you for reading my comments.
Sure.
I will just add in that I'm a representative of Low Country Local First, and we have reviewed the proposed restaurant additional space ordinance that was released publicly yesterday afternoon. With 9+ pages of technical information. I think we need a little bit more time to review this and get feedback from the business community. So I ask that you defer a vote on this evening, but please keep it forefront and in your minds as the business community desperately needs creative solutions for more outdoor space. And as I'm reading the ordinance right now, I'm not seeing any new benefits truly for them. So I look forward to working with you all, as well as Charleston Moves, on how we can creatively and swiftly get this passed for businesses. Thank you.
Well, I want to thank Lauren and Rory both for participating live with us during our public participation period this evening. and thanks to the other citizens who sent in their comments. But it was nice to have y'all participate live so we can show that we can do this and really increase public engagement. So thank y'all for your comments and being on board. Was there any other public participation items?
That was all I received.
Okay, terrific. So I'd like to move on along. I know some council members might like to comment on some of those comments, but we'll cover most of those items, you know, later in the meeting today. I want to move on because we have a special guest on the call this evening, and he's going to come on right after Tracy McKee does her presentation about our COVID-19 data and dashboards and how we're building evidence to make decisions. Now, our special guest is Dr. David Cole, president of the Medical University of South Carolina. So he's going to come on after Tracy and add some real interpretation, the real meaning behind all these numbers that he has inspired us to track. And I'm going to quote him before he comes on in a few minutes and say that all infections are local. Dr. Cole told me this a few weeks ago in one of our conversations. And so I asked Tracy to please drill down on the numbers that we've been sharing with council and the public about COVID-19 expressly to the city of Charleston as best we could. And that's by zip code. And in fact, there's about 8 or 9 zip codes that pretty closely, I'd say within 95% comprise our city limits. So it's real close to getting actual local statistics on what the coronavirus has been doing in our city. And I guess one housekeeping matter before we do that, could I ask for a motion to approve the updated code enforcement?
Move.
Second.
Okay, any discussion on that? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? So now at this time, I'll turn the floor over to Tracy McKee, our Chief Innovation Officer, who's been a remarkable job really in all of our COVID decisions and particularly in gathering and managing the data. Tracy?
Thank you, sir. I have a really quick message from Shannon Scaff, our emergency manager tonight before I talk a little bit about data. He just wanted to give a shout out both to Charleston County and to Federal Health. Today, Charleston County's mobile testing effort with Federal Health has been wildly successful. They had hoped to reach 1,000 residents by May 22nd. However, as of today, that goal has already been exceeded. Last Friday, Monday alone, nearly 400 tests were done, with results still pending for the Johns Island location. And there are still 8 mobile testing dates and locations remaining across the country. And I think what you're going to see in the data, and I expect also from Dr. Cole, how important it is that we're getting out and getting these tests done throughout the community. So with that, I'm going to share my screen. Okay, so hopefully everyone can see the MUSC dashboard now. Yes. Thank you. So I think all of you know how passionate I am about using data to inform our decision making. So I'm really happy to talk to you tonight about the dashboard that we've created and what we've been doing. And I hope that what we've created is really going to help city leadership as well as citizens make informed decisions as we navigate this pandemic. In developing the content of our dashboard, we've been working really closely with the team at MUSC responsible for creating this situation assessment. So if you haven't been to the MUSC site, definitely go to this page and take a look at what they've got here. They've got a lot of good data here and a lot of background as to how they're analyzing the data and what these status of green, yellow, and red actually mean and the things that they're looking at. So the MUSC dashboard tracks at the tri-county level. So it's really great as a region to see what's happening. And so we really wanted to take a look at like the mayor said, get a better idea of what's happening within the city. So, and the way that we've done this is we're looking a lot at the zip codes, the data that's coming by zip code. So most of the numbers that we're pulling are from the local zip codes. For those that we can't get by zip code, we're actually pulling for Charleston and Berkeley County. So still a little bit different from MUSC's site. But we really felt this was important so that you all and the mayor would really be able to keep your finger on the pulse of what's happening at the city level. Now, the data that we're using on our dashboard is, most of it is pulling from live data feeds directly from primarily DHEC. So that's a good thing and a bad thing. Number one, it's a good thing because the data is live. So as soon as DHEC puts out new data, all this data is updated and all the calculations are run again. The bad thing is that if their data feed, something happens with it, it could impact our dashboard. So we're trying to monitor this closely, make sure that this dashboard is not interrupted. And just let me say, as with everything COVID related, there's no playbook. So as the medical community learns more, the things that we measure may change. And this is especially true as more early detection systems come online. And I'm guessing Dr. Cole might talk a little bit about that as well. So just really quickly, at the top of this page are some of the stats that we are tracking. So, and these again are by zip code. So they're going to be a little bit different than what you're seeing on the MUSC site or the DHEC site by county. So, and over each of these boxes, in each box, there's a little information icon. And if you hover over those, it gives you a little more information about what that number actually means. So at the top is just a few stats, total positive cases, as well as the estimated number of cases within our zip codes. Further down, we get into some of the metrics. Again, we worked really closely with MUSC, that team, to come up with these metrics. And like I said, they are evolving and changing as we learn more. And we are in close contact with them to make sure that we are in line with them as those things change. So again, as you hover over each of these, it tells you kind of what those numbers mean. For example, this first one, new cases per 1,000 people, that's looking at the new cases that have come online over the last 7 days. And we do it on a per population basis or per capita basis. And this is a really good indicator of kind of, what we're able to handle at the hospital for capacity at the hospitals, as well as our ability to do contact tracing. Obviously, the more new cases that we have, those things become stressed. So the team at MUSC felt like this was a really important thing to look at and look at it over 7 days. So we, because things change so much from day to day. We're also looking at the trend in new cases, so that 5-day growth rate as well. And then another thing I think you all have heard a lot is the amount of testing that we're doing. Johns Hopkins, the School of Public Health, recommends that as long as we are less than 12% in our positives, that indicates that we're doing enough testing. And right now in the state of South Carolina, that's at 4%. So our testing is really, really ramping up, and that is looking really good for us. Something that's probably good for us to track on the inside is our PPE supplies. Some other things that are interesting and kind of changing are social mobility. So there's lots of information on social mobility right now. So you'll notice here, this probably looks very similar to the MUSC page. That's because we're pulling all of their dashboard right into ours so that you can come and get it all in one place if you'd like. And a little more interesting down at the bottom are just some of this data that's put in chart format. So you can kind of, those of you really interested can dig down and see the actual trends in the course of time. And then further down, you can actually look by zip code. So we broken it down by cumulative cases by zip code, as well as the active cases over time by zip code. And that's really all I had for you. And we will make this dashboard will be made public, so you all can check on it anytime that you would like. And we'll be sharing that after tonight. And I'm happy to take any questions that anyone might have.
Any questions for Tracy? So Tracy, leave the first couple of graphs on real quick. This daily trend of new cases, now this is just for the city of Charleston. You can see that it's pretty much flatlined down at 0 after about April 27th. So frankly, y'all, this is really a great graph for our city. It shows that we were able to flatten the curve and keep the number of cases down, and will allow us to reopen as long as we monitor and measure and make decisions on this data going forward. But that graph to me is really a thing of beauty. And the one next to it as well shows our total active cases over time, how they've been decreasing now since the middle part of April. So for well over 2 weeks, our total active cases have been on the decline, which again is a great thing, and another sign that our social distancing and being safe at home and all those measures, I believe really made a difference. So without further ado, I hope he's still on the line, waiting patiently, is Dr. David Cole of MUSC. I can't tell you how much he has meant to me personally, not just to the city of Charleston, now to the county, to the state and beyond. I'm not, all of our other healthcare providers, Roper, St. Francis, they're all doing a great job. But given that we are blessed with a teaching and research hospital, medical university, they just can provide another layer of expertise and resource to our whole community through all this. So thank you so much, Dr. Cole, and you're on.
Mr. Mayor and council members, thank you for allowing me to participate. I hope you can hear me okay. I'm actually doing my own version of social distancing, which is traveling in a car between Columbia and Charleston. So please, I'll pause for a moment. Hopefully you can hear me.
You're coming in loud and clear.
Perfect. So I thought it might be appropriate. We all of us, our community, our cities and our states have been walking down a long path over the last 8 weeks. And, you know, MUSC is no exception to that in terms of trying to manage not only the economic hit, but also being prepared from a healthcare system perspective, and also trying to help provide lead and guidance with expertise that we do have at MUSC. You know, so I would say a couple things. First, I would want to congratulate everybody on this phone call, because those numbers don't just magically happen that the mayor pointed out. In fact, we have our board meeting coming up later this week. I was reviewing the numbers. In mid-March in Charleston County, the infection rate, incidence of new infections was about mid-30s, which means that you double every 3 days. And subsequent to the decisions that you all have made, I think it's made a huge difference. And I've used the term, when I talk to people, I say, you know, okay, we got to first base. You know, congrats, we got to first base. And first base means that as a community, we were not overwhelmed. We were not New York City. You know, I certainly don't wish that on any community, but you can see the examples of what happens when health systems get overwhelmed, when infections get out of control. So I think it's appropriate to take a pause, at least for a moment, and say, wow, you know, okay, this did actually have a significant impact, and now it's given us a moment of grace to be able to go to the next step and then start to figure out how do we move forward effectively, as quickly and as safely as possible to get our economy back up and without stumbling through the next phase. So things I think are important to consider. And to me, the big picture really is pretty simple, but hard when you look under the hood. You know, our goals, I think what I've been advocating for are twofold. We have to keep the car in the middle of the road as we start to reopen the economy. And specifically what that means is two things: that the South Carolina hospital systems and in the Charleston area, the health systems that support our community have the capacity to treat COVID-19 patients. That means adequate staff, adequate beds, ventilators, PPE. And as a lead to that we maintain a low incidence of new COVID-19 infections. It doesn't mean it's going to be perfect. By definition, when we start to reopen things, there's going to be more infections. There's going to be concern. We all have to make imperfect decisions. In fact, you know, I'm sure every decision you're sort of taking a breath and saying, gosh, this is the right thing or not. And I think as long as we can keep the car in the middle of the road and continue to, you know, make adjustments as we move forward, you know, we'll be fine. So critical is having data. Tracy, I'm thank you for your efforts. It sounds like, and I couldn't see your graphs, but it sounds like they're awesome in terms of the work you've been doing with Mike Sweat and his group at MUSC. So if you think about, so first goal is as we move forward, we're transitioning from, I'll use the term isolate and quarantine as our method of sort of, you know, next step. We're transitioning from that. We're going to monitor and respond. So as we start to open the economy, we need to be strategic, we need to be thoughtful, and we need to be able to monitor, and we need to respond. And monitoring equals data. That means tests, it means timely tests, it means the ability to get the information at the ground level. I totally agree, and thank you for quoting me. You know, all infections are local, like politics. You know, and if you don't know what's happening at the ground level, you cannot make decisions. It's sort of a statistic, but you can't make decisions about, oh, this is likely what the source or cause of this is, and therefore this is what we need to do. I would say respectfully that now as we start to reopen, as opposed to sort of being told by the governor or the leadership, you know, across the state and in the cities and so forth, you know, what needs to happen, business leaders, community leaders, and individuals need to take responsibility as they move forward. For us, it's not about us telling other people what to do. It's about the community. So we have to be able to monitor so we can make informed decisions, and then most critically, especially as leaders, have to be willing to respond. Because if we start getting hot spots, we start getting a reemergence, if we start getting flare-ups, and we allow that to occur and don't respond to it, then all the work that we've done is at risk. It's at risk for, in fact, I would say that setback would even be harder than the first one. I'm an optimist, so I don't believe it's going to happen, but I think it's important to understand that there's still, you know, we've only gotten to first base. We're not sliding around home, to use that sort of, you know, imagery. So when you talk about, I'll give an example of, and without sort of getting too much into the details, MUSC has had eyes on the communities in which our regional hospitals are present. MUSC, Tri-County area, Florence and the 4 associated counties, Lancaster and the upstate. You know, and in Florence, with this dashboard that you saw, we started seeing green going from yellow to red. You know, and we reached out to the local community leaders and said, hey, that was about 3 weeks ago. It's like, we're seeing these numbers that are concerning. And the first response from those leaders, and again, not inappropriately, is, yeah, let's see where that goes. So, you know, we refreshed in 3 days and we revisited, the numbers were still climbing, and said, you know, this is something, we're early enough, this is not a crisis, but it needs to be responded to. And then the next words out of those leaders appropriately was, we need more ground level information to make a decision. You know, you can't just tell us that there's a ton of infections in greater Tri-County Florence. We need to know geolocation. We need to know where those are, where the clusters are, so then we can start making informed decisions. And fortunately, MUSC was doing testing in those areas. We could actually, with our own informatics group, pull out the geolocation map, and we could say, look, hey, northern Florence County, that's where your hotspot is. And at that moment, there was an aha moment that said, okay, we have enough information. We could talk in confidence to the people that are involved, because we have a good idea of being community leaders, what's going on here. And by the way, the numbers have reversed, and they've actually gotten back into the green zone as of late last week. So the reason I go into all that is that that's going to happen over and over and over. And we have to have the tools and the will to be able to make the right decisions, and to do so in a manner that crisis management, hopefully, but just can keep us again in the middle of the road. One last point, I think, which makes this whole thing very difficult. We use the term leading indicators, but we don't have those. What we have are lagging indicators. The nature of this disease and the time of this disease is such that when somebody gets exposed to or infected with the coronavirus, it's 2 weeks before they show up on the radar screen as a positive, right? So we're already 2 weeks behind in any sort of, next steps and or a more widespread event. And by the way, when we make a decision, if we make it rapidly, and Florence was best case scenario, and that took a week and a half, we're now 2 weeks down the line before we even see the effects of the decision, right? We're a month into something in terms of good or bad, whether the decision was right or wrong. So I keep talking to people and say, well, we're working hard to get better indicators, but you have to understand we're in a boxing match and we have to take 3 shots to the head before we can even hit back, because we're way behind typically when we start getting this information. So I tell you that not to create paranoia, but just to understand sort of the nature of what we're dealing with. And I'll pause there. So and I'm happy to answer any questions. Hopefully what I said made some form of sense.
Well, it definitely did, Dr. Cole, and we'll open it up for questions. I see Councilmember Shade and then Griffin have a question. Councilmember Shade.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Dr. Cole, this is Peter Shade. I represent area of West Ashley by Charlestown Landing. And first of all, thank you for your leadership on this issue. Thank you for the medical universities taking the lead on helping our community understand and be available to treat our citizens. You mentioned in the early part of your presentation that as we reopen, we will see more infections. And then you transition into the need for information and data. And there's going to be obviously a lag time between when we do the testing and when we get the information back. How do we balance that? How do we balance that when we get this information back in and through this lag time? How do we respond to that? What is your suggestion on how we handle that type of information?
Well, in many ways, that is the question, right? How do we respond most appropriately? I think one thought I would have is just realize that this is the information you're getting is aged, so you need to respond appropriately. Otherwise, we'll be even further behind. I think the other thing, another imperfect answer. By the way, I'm acknowledging I don't have great answers here, so I'm just being upfront with you. I don't have great answers on this question. If you do 20 things at once, and then things start turning sour, it's very difficult to know what 1 or 2 things did caused it, right? So it's like the world's worst experiment. You have like 80 variables and you're trying to understand. And so the problem is we can't wait 3 years to open up the economy and sort of, sequence, right? There's a real pressure, which I totally get, to get things open. So we're going to have to make intelligent decisions, maybe keep our finger on what we think are red flag or high risk areas that we're concerned about, and then keep those highly monitored. My concern honestly is in Charleston, the bar scene, restaurants reopening and people not paying attention to that. I think there has to be an ability to, try to keep upstream of what are common sense things that are high likely to be of concern or to lead to issues. So I'm not giving a good answer other than saying we all have to pay attention. We all have to walk down the street together, and I think use as much common sense as you can to try to help things, be minimized. It certainly can't be, hey, spring vacation's on and we're all going to just go back to normal straight up, because it'll create a real risk, I think, of a wave we can't deal with. I hope I answered your question.
Well, you kind of did, but I think what you're telling us is that we're going to have to play this by ear and see how these numbers pan out and what the numbers tell us, even if there is a lag time from the point of testing to the point of analyzing that information. And that's just reality.
Right. Yes. I guess I didn't say it very clearly. In the perfect world, you'd make one move and you'd see how it responds, say, hey, that was a good move, let's move to the next, right? And when you did your fifth move and it caused a problem, you say, oh, that was a bad idea, right? But that's not the way this is going to play out, right? There's going to be multiple phases of things that are sort of layered on top of each other, and it's going to be not all at once, but it's going to be hard to sort through that. So I think it's going to require, a lot of conversation with people that are on the ground level. I think it's going to be, one of the things I skipped over, not intentionally, was talking about, in addition to testing, is, contact tracing and follow-up. So, as you're starting to see patterns, we can start to see where things are, where the issues are. I mean, I can tell you right now that one of the things that are causing a lot of angst, which are obvious, it's not news, it's not nursing homes, and add to that closed facilities in which people are confined together, prisons, right? And then add to that, what about churches, right? If people are gathering at this moment where you have high-risk people, I mean, just descriptively, those would be high-risk things, I think, at the moment, so those would probably not be, there'd be things that either you monitor more intensely in terms of testing or have more guidelines in terms of managing, and maybe closer monitoring as a community to try to make sure that it's occurring, because it's just not going to be perfect. It just can't. The realities are that it's an imperfect balance between ideal health situation and ideal economic situation, and both of us have to figure out a middle ground that somehow we'll keep that car in the middle of the road. My response is, it doesn't have to be perfect. It just has to be enough.
Thank you so much, Dr. Cole. I appreciate your response.
Thank you. Councilmember Griffin and then Jackson.
Good evening, Dr. Cole. I hope that your car is in a specific lane and not driving down the middle of the road right now, but I like how theoretically we need to be in the middle of the road. I got a couple of questions. I'm gonna break them down for you so that you don't have to think too hard while you're driving. My first question is, we've heard a lot about these antibody tests and how they're starting. Can you kind of explain the benefit of getting this test and what it's going to do for us moving forward?
Sure. I'll be happy to talk about testing. So let me back up a moment, because these things get confused. So there's actually two major sort of types of tests. One is a diagnostic test, which is the preponderance of what's been done thus far. It's a PCR type test, so forth and so forth. What a positive diagnostic test says is that you have an acute infection. So when people have this testing, they get a diagnostic test. We're running a PCR test, which takes about 24 hours now to run to get a positive or negative. An antibody test basically tells you if you have been exposed to and your body's reacted to the virus. Now, there's a lot out there, and part of the unfortunate, in my opinion, unfortunate sort of reality is there's a lot of confusion about antibody testing and so forth. Right now with antibody tests, certainly in the last several weeks, it's been the Wild West. There's a ton of companies, I'm aware of at least 150, that are putting out different varied qualities of tests. And what do I mean by that? Understand the coronavirus is the common cold, okay? So if you have an antibody test that is not very specific and all it shows is you got exposed to the coronavirus, and oh, by the way, the COVID-19, right, you could have a ton of false positives, right? So the first thing, and by the way, MUSC has invested a lot of time in the last months to identify the best in class and to validate those tests with about a 99% certainty that, by golly, if this shows positive, it means you were exposed to COVID-19. So that's the first hurdle, to make sure you have a validated test. So what would you do with a validated test? Well, the first thing we're in the process of doing is trying to understand prevalence in the community. How widespread, how many people previously have been infected, and by the way, our MUSC's platform in the last 6 weeks, we've performed over 22,000 tests. I would say 2/3 of those are in Charleston County. We are seeing a less than 6% positivity. That's in a select group of symptomatic people. So at least within MUSC Health personnel, with our initial antibody testing, we're seeing around positive of prior infections. So first thing is to understand prevalence. Why, you say, why should I care? Well, one dimension is perception. Right now, it doesn't change the fact that somebody gets sick and they go in the hospital and some die. But if your prevalence in a community is 2 to 3% in a 500,000 people in greater Charleston County, as opposed to 500 COVID positive tests, that means that there's actually probably 5 times that many. It means that your death rate's 1/5 of what you actually perceive. You know, that helps when we're trying to figure out how much should we be concerned about this.
Right.
Because right now there's a lot of fear in addition to the biology of the disease. The second issue or sort of thing that we have to get clarified is, well, if my antibody test shows a positive, am I immune or not? You know, am I good to go and I can do what I want and not worry about it? And that's going to take some time to sort through. But the way we're going to be doing this, certainly and others are too, is following those who are positive and following those who show up to be positive and find out exactly over the next month to months what the recurrent infection rate is. If you want my personal opinion, and I don't have a crystal ball, but this is my opinion, you know, in the human experience in medicine, there's always a bell curve, you know, so there's likely going to be a couple people or some percent of people that have a recurrent infection. My guess is that if they have a recurrent infection, it's not going to be as severe. And being a little bit of an optimist, if you have a recurrent infection, the media can make what they want of it. But if the worst thing that happened is you shut up in your room for a day or two and got better, you know, who cares, really? You know, so we need to define that. But I don't know that. Don't quote me. I don't have that information. You know, I'm just telling you my gut feeling. But we need to define what the immunity is of that. We're only going to do that with antibody testing. So as communities and as businesses start to move forward, you know, we need to have a testing sort of algorithm, including diagnostic testing for high-risk individuals and those that are symptomatic, and antibody testing to sort of define who's already been, and start to eventually sort through, you know, risk for individuals. If you look at businesses, if you look at communities, you know, so forth and so forth. So I view it's an emerging, I think it's evolving. It's going to be an increasingly useful tool. It had, I think, like everything else we've been doing, it's been a short runway trying to do a lot at once, and it's, you know, there's a lot of confusion. So that was a long-winded answer. I hope it helped clarify.
It leads perfectly into my next question, though, which is, you know,
perfect.
I like what you're saying, and I'm an optimist too, that if you get it a second time, it's not going to be, hopefully not as bad. And I was telling the mayor this last week, I've had pneumonia at least 3 times in my life. So I understand that you can get things again, but, you know, hopefully it would be, you know, less severe as the last time. But I'm wondering, you know, we've heard a lot of Dr. Fauci mention that he thinks there's going to be another wave of this in the fall. And I was wondering what your opinion on that was, whether or not that would mean new people would get it, or, you know, I guess we're still waiting to kind of see with the antibody test, you know, what the word exposure means. Does that mean you couldn't get it again, or you could get it again? Do you expect that there could be a second wave here in the fall?
Okay, great question. I think there's 2 reasons why there might be some form of wave. One is what we just talked about, which is with our current virus that we sort of respond in a manner that allows it to flare back up and causes a second wave, right? So, and that could be a ever diminishing sort of ripple, right? A ripple effect. You know, it keeps flaring up, keeps going down, keeps flaring up. You know, and again, I think that's, as long as we don't actually allow it to become a wave, but we keep it something more manageable, you know, we'll be fine. Now, there's another reason to worry about a second wave. If anybody is sort of a history buff, in 1918, there was an influenza pandemic that racked the country and the world. And that virus mutated. And from
Spanish
the spring
flu
pandemic, yes, from the spring pandemic until September, when it reemerged, and the same virus changed itself and transformed itself into a much more virulent and dangerous virus. And that's when you think about what that caused. It was the fall the second pandemic that was actually wreaked havoc. So, my gosh, how do you live with yourself or sleep at night? Because you say, was it theoretically possible? And I'd say, well, the honest truth is we don't exactly know. But I will tell you a couple things. There's the category of viruses. These are RNA viruses. The flu virus is an RNA virus. HIV is an RNA virus. COVID's an RNA virus. And they have different sort of fingerprints, just like different children in terms of how they act. And in general, the COVID virus does not tend to mutate or change itself with nearly as much as rapidly as the flu virus. In fact, that's part of the reason why we're in this slow dance I was talking about, where it takes 2 weeks to show itself. It's just a slower virus. It doesn't tend, if you're asking a tendency, is there a higher risk of flu doing something? By the way, that's why every year we have the imperfect flu vaccine, because who knows what's heading our direction exactly, right? But the coronavirus is less likely to have that sort of pathway. Can't say never, right? In terms of a new virus that actually sort of goes below ground and reemerges in a new, more dangerous and deadly version. But I would say, as leaders of a community, you need to have heard at least once that, that's theoretically possible. And it's something that, and by the way, if you've been exposed to the first one, probably, but it depends on the nature of the mutation, you would be immune to the second one, but who knows? So I think at the moment, part of it, I don't want to be sort of myopic in vision. We have to deal with immediacy and what we're dealing with. I think that it's far, far more likely and much more realistic that we're going to be dealing with something we have control over, which is managing that sort of ripple effect, if you will, or trying to avoid that sort of second wave. But yeah, it's theoretically possible. If you're a virologist, I'm sure they'll give you a far, far more detailed explanation of what I'm trying to talk about.
Well, let's hope that it's a small ripple, Dr. Cole, and I appreciate you so much for those answers. That gives me a lot more peace of mind and allows me to kind of understand what we have to look forward to. So thank you.
Thank you. Councilmember Jackson.
Yes, thank you, Dr. Cole. I really just wanted to have the opportunity in public to thank you so much for the leadership that your institution across the board has shown to the whole region, the state. I can't imagine the outpour of work effort that people are sacrificing willingly. I do hope that you'll be able to get back to paying full salaries. I know that's been a big sacrifice for a lot of your dedicated employees, but I know it was out of caution and out of the control of knowing that you've lost revenue as a hospital system. I also wanted to thank you for your personal leadership. I remember early on, I think it was still, we had our last meeting in person, and the mayor was telling us how he was starting out his journey and learning all about this. And he could not say enough good about your, I think, an actual friendship that you all have developed. You could just tell that the mayor was feeling much more comfortable and, able to have that kind of reliable truth-telling partnership. So thank you so much for anything that has taken you to new heights of responsibility. I also wrote down some of the words you said early on in helping us understand that, we're going into a new phase. We're no longer isolating and quarantining, because that's impossible to stay like that forever as a community. And we're now into the monitor and respond. But the thing you said right behind that, I think, is what elected officials and the leaders of public citizens that you said, that it's now the turn of the owners and the citizens to take their own responsibility. And I just want to resonate with that. I do think you're right on target. People have been educated to every extent possible on all levels of data and science and human social mobility. And so I'm looking forward to being part of your team and the community's team, leading people to take their own responsibility. So thank you very much for being here with us tonight.
Thank you for your kind comments. We have a lot of really great teams at MUSC, so it'd be wrong for me to in any way take responsibility. I'm put in a position to try to sort of push forward with a lot of good people backing me. I do feel strongly. I think, obviously these things, you wake up at 3 a.m. with a lot of things, and I'm sure you all have the same experience. It's like, gosh, it's not like we're on family vacation. I'm the parents, and I'm telling the kids to quit poking each other in the back seat. It's like, the kids need to grow up, and I don't mean that in a negative sense, but it's like everybody needs to take responsibility, and it's not us telling somebody else what to do. And I know that's idealistic. I understand that. And there ultimately has to be accountability, I think, from a city perspective. An ability to sort of monitor and have some ground level eyes would be, in my opinion, useful, because there will be, crowds of people and people not really thinking that's really relevant to them and so forth and so forth. But I'm hopeful that enough people pay attention and take enough sort of social responsibility for us to be successful. I had another conversation, by the way, and I'll be quiet in a moment. Somebody was talking over the weekend about, football games, and, they're talking, the chance of you dying from the COVID virus is like infinitesimal. You should be able to go to a football game. Why wouldn't you? And it's like, well, because if you gather 180,000 fans and you just triple the number of people that are infected, they're going to go home and visit grandma, right? And then even though it may not affect you personally in terms of chance of dying or being ill, you have to take a bigger picture understanding of that we need to protect those at risk, and we need to do so in a thoughtful manner, and it requires a bigger view, in my opinion.
Well, keep giving us all of those good ideas and examples, Dr. Cole, because I do think that we have learned a lot from you and your institution, and we'll just continue to follow right along. Thank you.
Thank you.
Any other questions for Dr. Cole? Well, Dr. Cole, thank you again for being with us. And if you're just driving down the road, of course, you're welcome to stay online, but I bet you got some other calls to make. But thank you for your leadership, for your friendship. Y'all have just been, you and MUFC altogether have been remarkable. Thank you.
Thank you again. Bye-bye.
Thank you. All right. So we have a few ordinances up next. And might I suggest, without objection from council, that we take the first three and discuss and take action upon them. The fourth one being the matter of restaurants and outdoor dining, which I understand might necessitate a little more discussion. And in fact, one of our council members has requested that we might have a executive session about that. Do y'all mind if we kind of do the rest of our committee reports, and then save the restaurant matter till the end of the meeting with the likelihood that we might have an executive session? Is that okay?
Mr. Mayor, I move that item I, 4, 5, and 6 for approval.
I second that, Mr. Mayor.
Okay, we have a motion to approve 4, 5, and 6, and very briefly, that's to extend the declaration of emergency until May 31st, to extend certain matters that we've already passed, and get rid of others of the emergency ordinances we've passed over the last 6 or 8 weeks, and then to replace the stay-at-home or safe-at-home ordinance. Any discussion on any of those three? Councilmember Appel.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I would just say that ordinance number 6, the new stay-at-home ordinance, has some language in it that I think is relevant to the discussion on item number 7. So it may be necessary to take 6 and 7 together for that reason.
Okay.
I have no objection to amending my motion to take 4 and 5 for approval, Mr. Mayor.
I second it, and I have no objection also.
All right. Any discussion then on numbers 4 and 5? Hearing none, all in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? The ayes have it. And are y'all okay if we then hold 6 and 7 until we kind of get to the end of the meeting?
It's fine with me.
I agree.
All right. So next up is our Committee on Community Development, Councilmember Mitchell.
Yes, Community Development Committee met, and we had on April 30th at 4 p.m. and we had three different items, A, B, and C, and all of them was approved by the Community Development Committee, and it would later come back to the City Council for approval with later date.
Right. I believe, if I may add, that there were just a few modifications that the planning department still and legal still needed to work on. And of course, these ordinances are going to require public hearings and going to the planning commission. But from what I understand from staff, we'll probably have them up for first reading at our next meeting in May.
So I asked for approval for it from the Community Development to move on to City Council and to come back to City Council with various amendments or whatever the case may be from the Planning Commission.
We're kind of, this was all for information only, so it's kind of receiving this as for information, I believe.
I know we had for information, but I think we voted on all of them, I guess.
We did. We did.
So I need
a motion maybe to accept the committee report
as information. I need a second, someone.
Second.
I'll second.
Okay. Any discussion on any of those items?
Mr. Mayor,
Councilmember Warren.
I'd like to ask Mr. Lindsay if the smaller lot, I'm gonna say proposal, have we already given that first reading?
Councilmember, my understanding is that we have not, because that is going to be modified slightly as a result of the discussion at CD committee. So those modifications will come to you for a first read at the next meeting.
Okay, that's fine. Thank you.
Yeah, that's what it is.
All right. Any other discussion, questions? All in favor, please say aye.
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 Opposed? The ayes have it. Next is our Committee on Recreation, Councilmember Gregory.
I'm coming.
Take your time.
Yes, Mr. Mayor. We had a presentation from the organization that will be implementing the study for our parks, and it was just for information only. There was nothing to vote on.
All right. And do you want to give a report on what that information was from them briefly?
What they did was they outlined how they would go about assessing our parks and making recommendations accordingly. We also had a discussion with regard to cost and whether they would be able to recommend to us any source of funding. And as a part of their study, they will do so. The study is going to be extremely comprehensive. It will assess all of our parks. It will come up with a needs assessment, and they will make their recommendations accordingly. If I'm not mistaken, that plan, and Jason, correct me if I'm wrong, I think that plan is available online for other council members to review.
We can certainly make it available. What the presentation was, as Councilmember Gregory indicated, is it was the process that we'll be going through over the next 10 to 12 months, and also piggybacking on the comprehensive plan to come up with a statistically valid, to put statistically valid surveys out on many different platforms and come up with a Parks and Recreation master plan that is commensurate with national standards. And as indicated by Councilmember Gregory, we'll also take an assessment of all of our existing parks and facilities and make recommendations on at the end product for what improvements we might need. We'll take the 10-minute walk campaign into consideration, and it'll really take all areas of the city, evaluate where we have gaps in service that will hopefully guide our capital planning for the future so that we can provide equitable park access to all.
Mr. Chairman.
Yeah.
Thank you. I'm really happy to hear Mr. Konsberg talk about the process, because I tuned into the Recreation Committee meeting online yesterday thinking that I was hearing the presentation about the actual master plan. And since we hadn't really heard anything at all about it, I was not looking forward to hearing a plan that was pretty much, done. So the fact that this really is the beginning of a process that will heavily involve the community. They emphasized over and over and over again how they get out and walk into every park that they're going to give us recommendations for with community input, and literally talk to the people who are in the park at the time, also hold strategically located neighborhood meetings. Chairman Gregory, you went the extra mile and made sure that they talked to the opportunity to involve all groups around the whole city and the locations where they live and work and play. So I think this is an exciting add-on and adjunct to the comprehensive plan. I know we expected that this would actually take place a little earlier in the city's calendar, but the fact that it's now dovetailing right in with the comp plan, I think will work really well for all of us. So it's an encouraging thing. And I think the word process should have been on the agenda, just so people weren't misled to think that an actual plan has been developed. So thank you very much.
We're pretty far from that. Thanks a lot. Any more questions? If not.
All right. So, Mr. Chairman, would you like for me to give a little update about Hampton Park, since it's been
Yes,
mentioned?
yes, would you please, Mayor?
Yeah, so I did that at the committee meeting, and then it came up earlier today at the Traffic and Transportation meeting, but not everybody's on one of those committees. And then for the public at large, prior to the change we made about 10 days ago with Hampton Park, it was open. Well, it depends on the way you look at it. It was closed to vehicular traffic for 8 hours a week, 2 hours on Tuesday, 2 hours on Thursday, and 4 hours on Saturday. And we went in that decision from 8 to 54 hours a week a little over a week ago. So there were some logistics and staffing issues that came up, being the fact that we actually staff whenever we close the park to vehicular traffic, because believe it or not, there are some citizens in their car who, if you see an orange cone up, they'll just drive around it. And so we actually have to have staff present while we do this. And it was, a pretty big change from 8 to 54 hours. In addition, there are some visitors to Hampton Park particularly who might be handicapped, or they might be coming from Daniel Island where they can't just walk over to the park. So they come in their car. And the way the park is laid out now, as most of you know, if you want to park in the park with your car, you can't get there if we close Mary Murray Drive off. And so they were parking in the surrounding neighborhoods. In fact, we were getting some complaints from folks in the neighborhood about people who were parking in the neighborhood. Of course, now we've gone back to neighborhood zone enforcement, so they would get tickets. So anyway, seeking a middle ground, we've proposed and have started a new schedule where the vehicular traffic is closed every day for 4 hours. And that's in the evening, late afternoon, early evenings on the weekdays from 4 to 8, Saturday mornings, and Sunday afternoons. And so let's just try this for a week or so and see how it goes. I know some people would like for it to stay closed all the time, but then there are some people who drive a car who need to get to the parking lot. So this is kind of a middle ground. And I must tell you, I would bring this back to council for an official approval before we do anything long-term. But my thinking about kind of finding this middle ground is that maybe this is a precursor to a longer-term change. And also at the same time, I must share with y'all, I've asked Keith Benjamin, Traffic and Transportation, to look at the necessary equipment, barricades or bars that easily come up and down that we could invest in to make opening and closing the park easier and require less staff and all like that. So that's my update, and I just thought I would share that with everyone.
Mr. Mayor.
Mr. Mayor.
Yes,
Chairman. Let Councilman Gregory go first. That's his district, so I'll speak afterwards.
I mean, actually, it's Councilman Zachary. But our districts. But I do think long term that we really need to involve the neighborhoods, Hampton Park, include the Citadel, include Wagner Terrace, of course, in the discussion before we do anything permanently, because those are the communities that will be having the most significant impact. And believe it or not, folks who drive also after a long day appreciate driving through that park because that park does in fact gives them an ability to escape from whence they're coming. So a lot of people really look forward to it. But I just want to make sure that before we decide long-term, one, I think it should be taken up in the Recreation and Parks Committee before we go permanent, and make sure that we involve those neighborhoods that are affected by any changes that we make.
Absolutely. I don't know if you can see Councilmember Saccharin wearing in Mitchell.
First.
Saccharin?
Councilman Mitchell first.
Oh, Mitchell first. Okay.
Yeah. Bill, I was going to allude to the same thing that Councilman Gregory said by getting to the neighborhood and contact the neighborhood association and the neighbors in that area. Because I think a lot of the council members might not be aware of the big fight that we had when we closed, because that was 2 lanes at one time. And we closed 1 lane to make sure that the people had bicycle and be able to walk and be able to exercise. And that's what we did. But it was a big fight. And a lot of council members not aware of that big fight that we had. I mean, we took a lot of hits because we did it. So we got to be very careful. And now closing the streets now when we already closed 1 lane when it was 2 lanes, to be able to have for the bicycle and for people to walk safely and exercise safely. So these are the things I wanted to say because I know how it was when we brought this up the first time when we did it.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Councilmember Saccharin.
Thank you, Mayor. I just want to applaud you all for coming to what I think is a great compromise with the hours. I know folks in my community and Councilmember Gregory and Councilman Mitchell are probably going to say we should do more, but I think this is a great compromise. And I want to say thank you to Lori and Chief Reynolds, Keith, and Jason. Just I know it requires a lot of effort and coordination, so thank you for that. And I've made it very clear. I personally would like it closed, but this is a conversation for the community, and we should involve the community, and they should ultimately make that decision in partnership with the Citadel. So thank you for coming up with a great compromise.
Thank you. Councilmember.
I think Keith had his hand up.
Yeah, I did.
Mr. Mayor, Keith?
Mr. Mayor? You calling me?
I think he did.
Okay, yeah. I'm sorry. I didn't hear it on this end. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Councilman Mitchell is exactly right. Now, that's probably my English teacher probably wouldn't like that, but he's spot on. there's two roads going around Hampton Park, I don't know, 50, 60, 70 years.
Yes.
And when the attempt was to close the inner road, that was strictly for bicycles. And the reason you go around Hampton Park now and you see half of that lane being striped, because the bicycle didn't need 10 feet, and the lane was 10 feet wide. So half was for the bicyclists and half was for the for pedestrians. And also on the inner circle, just beyond that striped portion, on the inside of the park, you'll see a gravel portion, because some people, when you jog on the asphalt, you get shin splints. So there's a circle on the inside of the park, so you can jog on the dirt and not get shin splints. All that happened during the, and the crosswalks coming in by the Citadel and coming in by Ashley Avenue and the like, making it a little bit safer. I've noticed with great attention the letters that's been coming in, but I think what we have to look at is Hampton Park is a regional park. It is unfair to the citizens from around the rest of the Charleston metropolitan area to only make this decision based on the communities that live the closest to Hampton Park. And you're right, there was a huge fight to close that inner lane, Mr. Mayor. That happened during the last term of, well, not the last term, maybe the next to the last term of Mayor Rowley's term. So I think when we send out a survey, basically, I think we ought to not just do it with all due respect to the neighborhoods that's closest to it. Those things need to come out West Ashley, Daniel Holland. We all use these parks. That's one thing about the city of Charleston. We have wonderful parks. And one reason you're going to hear me stand up hard on this one is because I represent an interior district. The majority of District 8 doesn't have access to the waterways. So I want all of you all who have access to waterways, or all of you all who have access to regional parks, to expand them, to make them, to increase the quality of life for it, because the people at District 8 and from some of these interior districts, far away as Johns Island and Daniel Island, to come to Hampton Park and be able to enjoy that park. So it would be short-sighted, with all due respect, to only take into account of the neighborhoods that abut Hampton Park. And by the way, by the time you've taken the full view of the neighborhoods that abut, in particular, the neighborhoods on the northern portion of the park, that's where you're going to find the pushback of the majority of people saying no, because that's where we found it before. So this is a topic that's been up for discussion and, quite frankly, hotly debated previously on council. So that's why it's good to pass along some of this institutional knowledge. But some of the initiatives that the Park Conservatives is trying to put into Hampton Park, believe me, that was a big debate. And the lease that they have is for how long, Councilman Gregory? Is it 25 years? And that can go as much as 50 years with a 20-year renewal, or a 25-year renewal, eventually with a cafe being there. This is designed to help the entire city, not just 4 or 5 neighborhood associations. So it would be short-sighted to look at it only from that perspective. I just wanted to share that. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Hey, Mr. Mayor, this is Gregory again. Just 2 points. The first is, we need to make sure that the users of the park follow the rules. We now have runners running in the crosswalk. They never use the graveled area, okay? As a result of that, they're right next to the cyclists. I mean, we're waiting for an accident to happen because we purposely put those crosswalks to separate the cyclists from the joggers. That doesn't happen in the park. We need some enforcement. The second thing is, we need to make sure that people are running, are riding in the same direction. We have people walking and riding in different directions. And as a result, again, it's an accident waiting to happen. And lastly, I don't think that we should just be concentrating on Hampton Park. I think that we have other parks in this city that is conducive to cycling and jogging. And the one that comes to mind is White Point Gardens. Why are we going to just focus on Hampton Park without looking more comprehensively at the parks in the city, and I mean citywide, where we may be able to do similar things? The reason why I only talked about 2 or 3 neighborhoods is because of the effect that it may have on, direct effect that it may have on those neighborhoods, particularly as it relates to parking. It has already increased the volume of traffic coming down Grove Street in our neighborhoods and 10th Street in our neighborhoods. So I do think that we need to think a little more broadly in terms of the effects that we don't want to happen on our peace and our serenity in the neighborhoods that butt the park. So while I totally agree with Councilman Waring that the park is for all of Charleston, it's not for any specific neighborhoods. But my issue is when we make those kinds of decisions, we have to consider the effects that it may have on those neighborhoods that border the park. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. All right, so without further ado, let's move on to the Committee on Public Safety.
Well, wait a minute, Mr. Mayor, one last point. I think it would be good if the plans that the Park Conservancy has, in particular for the entertainment facility that's envisioned to be built there, to be shared with the new members of council. Because ingress and egress, when weddings are being held at that facility, where are those people going to park? That means you're going to push that parking out in the extremities of the neighborhood, as opposed to being able to entertain some of that parking inside the park. So you were right about handicap and the like on your initial comments. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Yeah, when we have the community-wide input and discussion about the long term, we'll include that as well. Good point. Councilmember Shade, Committee on Public Safety.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, members of council. The Committee on Public Safety met on May the 1st around 2 o'clock in the afternoon. We received an update from our one and only Dan Riccio on short-term rental ordinance and enforcement. And I'm going to read some numbers to you as to where we stand following the enactment of our short-term rental ordinance in July of 2018. Since July 10th, 2018, 646 permits have been issued for short-term rentals. 1,718 advertisements for short-term rentals have been removed. 1,209 advertisements still are in existence. There have been 241 criminal summons issued for violations of the short-term rental, of which 198 of those 241s have led to a conviction, either by a plea of guilty or a adjudication by being found guilty. There are 43 cases still pending. And I think this is a very interesting statistic. 75 houses have been returned to the housing stock, and 110 properties have been returned to long-term rental status. So the impact of our short-term rental ordinance has had a tremendous positive impact on the community. And I thank Dan and his team for the diligence on this, and we'll get further updates as this progresses. The other issue that we addressed was concerning the interviews of several candidates for a judicial appointment. I will update you that we have met last week to start that process, and we have tomorrow and Thursday more interviews scheduled, and hopefully we'll be able to vote and pass on to the mayor some recommendations for municipal judicial appointments. And just one side comment, great thanks to my committee for their work and diligence on this. We did meet for the interviews in person at 2 George Street. We were properly socially distanced from one another and from the candidates, and it worked really well. And I mentioned that to the mayor earlier this afternoon, so that when the appropriate time comes back up for us to meet in person, this was a good trial run for us to see how we can do social distancing and have meetings in person. So I was encouraged by that. And I look forward to that opportunity when we can probably transition into our council meetings where we're all together in the same facility, but adequately distant from one another. So that's my report, Mr. Mayor. Thank you.
Great, thank you. Any questions or comments for Councilmember Shade? All right, I don't think we need to, that was just an update, so
Yes,
no
sir.
action taken. Next up is our Committee on Public Works and Utilities, Councilmember Waring.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I still want to give a shout out to Mr. Riccio and Councilman Shahid on that report. That was a good report. You remember the problems with short-term rentals, so that's houses being returned to the housing, long-term housing stuff. That's great. The Committee on Public Works and Utilities did meet on Monday, and item A1, acceptance of the 2018 FMA grant award for the acquisition of 2 properties with a federal award of $481,794.35 and a city match of $53,532.72 was voted on and passed unanimously, and I so move its approval with City Council.
Second.
Any discussion? All in favor, please say aye.
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 Any opposed? The ayes have it.
Thank you. Item A2 will be our stormwater project updates, and I ask all council members to listen up because in most cases, Mr. Fountain is going to touch on projects in most of the 12 districts around the city. Mr. Fountain.
Thank you, Councilman Waring. Just as a brief update again, as our first meeting of the month, we went through the major projects ongoing with a status update since our last update on each project. So starting with the Spring Fishburne project phase 3, that project is getting close to wrapping up. We do expect to be complete in the next couple of months. It's a long process for the tunnel work. This is the tunnel component of the project, but we are coming to a close. We did have our penultimate tunnel inspections this week where we established punch list items, and then we'll come back and kind of clear up any remaining issues on the underground work. The contractor's continuing with surface work. The Harmon Field surface connections where they tie the surface piping drainage systems into the deep tunnel system are now complete, and we'll be restoring sites back to existing condition at a number of tunnel locations and shaft locations around the city. Spring Fishburne phase 4, this is the wet well and the outfall between the 2 bridges. That project, we've now completed our pipe pile installation, which Councilman Shade had some commentary about my descriptions of pipe piles, but that's the driven pile that is a very memorable sound to anyone who's been near a pile driving site, where you hear a loud clang with a pause between clangs. But that the pile driving is complete at that site. We are still installing sheet pile on the outfall and wet well. Those are kind of the large flat sheets of steel that go into brace excavation. We have 82% of our sheet pile installed, and that's what you can kind of see from the bridge sitting out into the marsh and blocking off the excavation where the wet well will be constructed. That's enough sheet pile that they are well underway now on excavation within those structures as well, and they'll be adding in bracing as they continue that excavation. The low battery project, project's also proceeding well. We've completed the pile work primarily on the project and are working on the construction of the platform. In order to construct the wall platform, we're actually saw cutting and removing sections of the old wall. That's the facing that kind of comes out into the harbor area. They remove that in small sections where they'll build a temporary mobile flood wall, cut the existing wall, remove that wall, and then pour back the concrete to build in the new wall. If you go look at the site, you'll be able to see kind of where the promenade will sit, though right now it's mostly a gap between sections of concrete retaining wall that will later on be filled with bluestone and faced. So that project is continuing well. And it's been a really good sign that we've made good production on this project, because it's let us test the flood wall work, the temporary flood wall work, kind of outside of hurricane season. So it's a good way to make sure that the process is moving smoothly as we get into kind of higher risk portions of the site from a weather perspective. Lake Dodder project, this Weston Sampson's preparing our construction drawings and encroachment permits with DOT for the ramjack into the pipes under Glen McConnell, and we're staying in coordination with the county on that project. Danoon Drive, this is one of the smaller rear yard drainage easement restoration style projects. We've issued our notice to proceed to the contractor. Contractor's mobilizing and should be underway with work within the next week. That's in the Shadow Moss area. Lord Calvert Drive, this is a roadside drainage improvement where we're repairing a failed section of roadside pipe on what's a rather large drainage system along this smaller road. The pipe and box installation work has all been completed. We did have one more small utility issue. We had a major utility issue earlier in the project. We had a much smaller issue at the end of the project. We were able to resolve by just shifting to elliptical pipe. We will have a small change order coming for that. That shift, that's about $6,000 is what we're expecting for the elliptical pipe adjustment. But we were able to avoid the sewer impacts or having to do any other redesign on the project. And we are now in the point of backfilling and restoring driveways and returning the site to normal. So that should end the substantial work on that project as well and get that drainage working again. The Sherwood Forest drainage improvements, another one of the smaller projects we've been working on with the restoration of a backyard system and reconnection of some existing drainage. We have two primary contractors on this one. There's a fence removal operation where the fence removal contractors visited the site and is scheduling their removal work. So the tree removal contractor can come in, clean up the tree system. We'll be able to restore the drainage system then through these rear lots that we've obtained temporary construction easements for and permanent drainage easements, and then place the fencing back. A discussion on Lockmore Terrace. This is another community in Shadow Moss, and this one's a little bit different, that we've been looking at abandoning the potential for abandonment of the last section of a drainage easement that doesn't have any actual system constructed in it, so that a homeowner can basically do some drainage improvements along that system that they've been looking at doing themselves. We've contacted some of the properties surrounding that parcel to see what the other homeowners have as concerns. 3 of the properties we've contacted have been supportive so far, and we're still waiting to hear back from 2 more of them. Mueller Drive, it's also on smaller rear drainage parcel project in West Ashley. We have our notices drafted. We're scheduled to do our door-to-door visits tomorrow on that project and kind of hand out information and discuss just possible disruptions of the drainage easement in the rear yards with the property owners. Arrowwind at Emerald Forest. This is the installation of a new drainage inlet also in West Ashley. That project, the contractor is underway. They've done the initial excavation work and they're working to add in the inlets and restore that system. The King Uji project, which is a slightly larger drainage project at the intersection of King and Uji, obviously downtown. We do have our DOT encroachment permits now for that project. We've completed those agreements with DOT. We're working right now to obtain temporary construction easements from the property owners so that we have access to install the pipe work on the project. We'll have to kind of cut back into people's properties and then restore, but it's a temporary disruption to those properties. Yeah. And we're also coordinating with Charleston Water Systems, as they have a water line improvement project that they're planning to do this summer as well along that corridor. So we're trying to put that in as a in-contract utility relocation, like we've done with the low battery, where Charleston Water Systems reimburses us for the work. It helps prevent conflicts between the 2 agencies, and it also means you only have one cost between the 2 agencies for restoring the street back to its full condition after all the utility work. For the Central Park Drainage Project, this is the project where we're currently evaluating the drainage system on James Island, north of Central Park. We have a draft report, final report that we received from the consultant AECOM. So we're going through that in our internal review process, and we should have something ready to discuss with the stakeholders in the neighborhood in that area in the next month. Then we'll be able to move that into hopefully a design and permitting approach for recommended improvements. The Barbary Woods project. This is the drainage improvement just north of Maybank on Johns Island and a number of communities that have flooding issues. We have the selection committee has met, has ranked the 2 highest qualified firms and is finalizing, having interviews for that project. And then we'll be bringing the most qualified firm into negotiations and then bringing a scope to council for that improvement project. The Windermere drainage improvement. This is similar to Barbary Woods again, but in Windermere and West Ashley, where we now have a request for qualifications that has closed. We've had a number of submittals from interested firms, and the selection committee is currently reviewing those qualification packages, and we'll meet to discuss and see if we need to do interviews on those packages. The Forest Acres drainage improvement project. This is phase 2 of the work, where phase 1 was the large culverts that extended under St. Andrews Boulevard. We do have a path forward with AT&T now. We've given them enough information on our requirements for the project that they're able to finish their applications for DOT encroachment permits. So they're working through that process at this time. While they're doing that, the city is actually combining our phase 2A and phase 2B projects into a single phase, which will make our construction a little more efficient and our design a little more efficient. So we'll be able to take advantage of that delay to at least improve our efficiencies on the project as well. Then just moving on, if that's okay with you, Councilman Waring, to the flood updates. There's only a single flood update this week, which was the buyout grant that we had just voted on. That is an FMA award for the acquisition of 2 residential properties, one of which is in Church Creek and one of which is in Oakcrest on James Island.
Okay, great. Thank you, Mr. Fountain, for all that you do. I'd like to ask, in case any council members had any questions on projects that Mr. Fountain addressed that's in your particular district. Any questions?
No, I'm happy to see we got the king in Hughie.
Somehow I thought you would feel that way. Now, there was one question that came up, believe it or not, from maybe out of turn, Mr. Mayor, but Councilman Shealy called me about the housing development at the very end of Ashley Hall Plantation Road, where they took part of the street and we think encroached with sidewalks being put there. It's a new subdivision. You remember the one that was going to be annexed into the city and opted to remain in the county. So I don't know if Mr. Benjamin had a chance to look into that as yet. This just happened on yesterday, but the paving of it. Councilman Shealy, you want to have any input on that?
Yeah, thank you, Councilman Waring. I know that Keith Benjamin's looking into it. He did think back with me a little bit. I see he's on there, but he's muted. But yeah, I guess it's Captiva Road.
Right.
There's where the stop sign was, the road used to go to. There's a big gap. They took a lot of road for that sidewalk. So I see Mr. Benjamin's on now. So.
Yeah, that I can't speak to the plan of the development because that was permitted and accessed by the county. The concern that I had was whether or not they were encroaching on city right of way. The entirety of Ashley Hall Plantation Road is a city street. It's not a DOT street. And so I did send an inspector out there to check out what was happening. If they're doing any operations of their business, so their private property and taking up any of our right of way, they need to have a city permit to be able to be in our right of way. So had an inspector out there today. He's going back out there tomorrow to verify what work is happening and getting the right permits for whatever they're trying to do, so we can get an understanding of what they're doing that's on the city side and what they're doing that's in county ownership.
Okay. Listen, thank you, Councilman Shealy. I ride through there in the morning when I'm exercising on my bike route. So they have taken in some of what I think is the city's right of way. But I appreciate your due diligence on that and looking into that, Mr. Benjamin, and look forward to your information. Beyond that, Mr. Mayor, that's the extent of my report. Thank you.
Thank you so much. All right, next up is Committee on Traffic and Transportation, Councilmember Seekings.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, fellow council members. I will be brief. The Committee on Traffic and Transportation met today at 2 o'clock. We had all in attendance. We took up 2 maintenance agreements, one for the Clements Ferry Road Phase 2 project. The other was for the Folly Albemarle maintenance agreement with the county. Both of those were approved unanimously. If there's any specific questions about either one of those projects, I see that Mr. Benjamin is here, but those are maintenance agreements between us and the county for 2 distinct areas of the city. One is in Councilmember, I think, Del Chapo's district. The other is in Councilmember Appel's district. We then got an update with no need for action on the towing contract. For those of you who weren't aware, our towing contract in the city expired on May 1st. It was put back out to bid. There are 5 zones, I think: Johns Island, James Island, West Ashley, Downtown, and Daniel Island. Those contracts have been let. Turkey's Towing for Johns Island and James Island, Jennings Towing for Downtown, West Ashley, and Daniel Island. They went into effect on the 1st. There is no cost to the city on the change of those contracts or the reletting of those contracts. And if there's no other questions, that is my report. I do believe we probably need an approval on the 2 maintenance agreements, so I would so move.
Second. Any discussion on those? All in favor, please say aye.
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 Any opposed? The ayes have it. Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Next, the Committee on Ways and Means, Councilmember Gregory.
I move for approval. The report as submitted, Mr. Mayor.
All right. We have a motion and it's been properly seconded. Any discussion? All in favor, please say aye.
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 Opposed? The ayes have it. Next, we do have 2 bills up for second reading regarding some general bond obligation bonds and a anticipation note. Would we get a little presentation remarks by our finance director, Amy Wharton? Is she on the line?
I am.
Want to share the news of what we got here?
Sure. So we received bids today on all of the on both of the bonds, the bond anticipation note and the refunding. And we have I'm sorry, now I'm trying to get my. We had for the refunding bond 3 banks that had bid, and the lowest interest rate was 1.17%. And that will, on that refunding, will give us a $344,000 savings.
Man, that's wonderful.
Right.
And then for the bond anticipation note, we had a 1.20% interest rate.
That's good.
Man, we should borrow $1 billion at that rate.
We may need to.
So we will be accepting that tomorrow by noon. We have to accept with the bank, and so we will be doing that. And then closing, we're expecting to close June 3rd.
That's great work. Wonderful work.
I see our bond counsel on the meeting as well. Jeremy Cook, do you want to add any remarks?
Nope, Amy did a great job, but I think particularly in these times to get 7 bids from I think 5 different banks between the 2 shows the strength of the city's credit even in these most unusual times. So
can I entertain a motion to
move?
Second.
Yes.
Yeah. For second reading? Any further discussion? All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Now for third reading.
For approval.
Second.
Any discussion? All in favor, please say aye.
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 Any opposed? The ayes have it. Thank you, Jeremy and Amy, for your fine work on that. So, so that'll bring us back up to the 2 emergency ordinances. One, replacing the stay-at-home ordinance, which I guess has some relation to the restaurant matter. It might need a little updating because it's Governor McMaster had made a change since that had been written up. And then the ordinance regarding restaurants And I see Councilmember Brady's hand up, so I'm going to recognize you first.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I move that pursuant to State Statute 30-4-70, subsection A, item 2, regarding executive sessions, that we go into executive session to receive advice from our legal counsel regarding these two ordinances.
I second that, Mr. Mayor.
Any discussion about going into?
Yes.
Session? Councilmember Griffin.
I'm just wondering why we need to go into executive session over these issues.
Same here.
Councilmember Brady, do you want to respond?
Yeah, I think there's some conflicting language in between the two of them, as well as just some legal questions that I know some other council members may want answered as well.
All right. All in favor of going into executive session, please say aye.
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 Any opposed? The ayes have it. So if y'all will just mute